Welcome to another episode of the Good Viral Podcast. Today, it is a host to host episode between Demian and I. And we have a pretty controversial topic that we're going to talk about today. We've interviewed a lot of good causes at this point, and we are going to be bringing on some more good causes as the episodes continue. And some of those episodes are going to be a little controversial. So today, Demian and I are going to actually be talking about, can violence be done for good? And we're going to talk about some wide subjects and some subjects that have actually hit the silver screen in Hollywood, some subjects that really have hit the political spectrum, and then maybe some subjects that are going to be new to you. And we're going to talk about, can violence be done for good, meaning someone doing a violent act towards someone else or perhaps even an animal, and does that actually help the well-being of our planet, humanity, the environment, etc.? And so this is going to be very interesting, and we kind of have outlined this because we want to be very conscious that in this episode we're going to be talking about obviously violence, which means topics that are going to be very sensitive, could be triggering to our listeners. So do know and caution, this is kind of your trigger warning that we're going to be talking about sensitive subjects, and it could involve children, it could involve hurting animals, and it can involve all sorts of topics of that. So if this is not for you, you can skip this episode. But if this is something that you really want to dive into and see what's going out there in the world that is, in our opinion, helping things, then feel free to stick with us and consider sharing it with that trigger warning involved. Cool. So, Debian, why don't you kick off a little bit of your thoughts when it comes to, can violence be done for good? Like, what does that mean for you? And what are some things going on in the world that really spark your interest with that?
Yeah, it's really an interesting topic because I think that one of the things that we ran into when we're looking for causes to support with Good Viral is that a lot of times when you choose something that you agree with or a group that you agree with, you find that suddenly you're sort of on their side, and that means that you've literally taken sides. There might be somebody on the other side of that who might be also good people with good ideas and good thoughts, right? But they just have a different opinion about certain things. So we end up taking sides when really what we're trying to do with Good Viral is just get people to do good things with their life. Try to spend more time doing good things for others. But there is a certain point where we have to say, okay, yeah, I'm definitely against this, and I'm definitely for this. And I think a really clear cut example would be, for example, human trafficking, right? So I can't think of many people that I know that would say, oh, I'm definitely for that. So I mean, it's something that we can all agree is something that is it's horrible to even think that it exists. The degree to which it exists in the world is actually a very much greater degree than most people realize. There's also been an excellent documentary on Netflix called Seaspiracy, which talks about the injustices of some of the injustices of the fishing industry, and and just more mindful about eating fish and where it's coming from and what's happening to the oceans. Of course, when I was a child, we thought that the air and the oceans were infinite, and of course, in my lifetime, we've learned that they're not, and in that they shine some light on modern day slavery, right, where people are literally tricked into going onto a boat, and once they're on the boat, they find out that they can't get off the boat, right, and so it's either work or potentially die. And so these kinds of things are they exist, and like I said, it's easy for us to take sides and say, I'm definitely against that. Now, does that even accomplish anything? Well, just conversation, of course, is where it starts. I mean, obviously, you, the listeners, need to decide if you want to become more involved against something or supporting some organizations that are doing what you feel is the right thing to do. But it does start with a decision about how you feel about something, and And that's what we, for example, one example Anastasia and I were talking about recently was oil spills. So you've got on the one hand, I mean, I've used a car my whole life to get around, and of course, when I'm not using a car, I'll be on a bus, and I'll be on a plane, and of course, all of these things require oil. But we always want to demonize oil companies, like they're a big evil, and yet we're all, not all, but many of us are using the product that they produce, right? So then you've got, you might say, a necessary, maybe unnecessary evil, but one thing that happens is oil spills. It's something that is really been almost impossible to avoid for any major company, and yet when that happens, it's obviously tragic. Everything that happens as a result of that, and so we have to say, okay, well, do I want to be on the side of the environmentalists or of the families that are affected by the oil spills, or do I want to try to stay in the middle and not take sides at all? And I think for most of us, we want to say, no, it's definitely, these companies that are making huge amounts of money should definitely be more responsible and so forth. But, really what it's about for me, and maybe my answer is too long here, but really what it's about for me is saying, hey, sometimes there's controversial things, and we have to sort of like a minefield. We have to sort of walk through that and sort of learn and observe and try to understand more about what's happening. It's a very, very complex world, and things are not so easy it's not easy to take sides. It's not easy to go onto a side of something and always know that that side is the right side, but I think that it all starts, and that's what our podcast is all about. It all starts with discussion. It all starts with thinking. It all starts with trying to gain more knowledge and more understanding, and also to be more to be better listeners, to people that we don't agree with. There are many people that do terrible things just simply because they may feel like it's the only way that they can survive or to feed their families. And who are we to say that they can't feed their families, right? So we have people that are doing literally atrocious acts in order to support themselves and their families. So it's always complicated, and I think that it's an amazing, or it's an important subject to talk about. So with that said, there's some examples, but I want to get your thoughts and take on the topic, Anastasia. So when we talk about doing violence for good and or choosing sides, any of these controversial topics around things that maybe we want to say that we don't agree with or don't want to support, but there's a part of us that does agree with, a part of us that does support it. What are your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah. So, real quick, I think I also want to prime our audience to kind of understand our take and our approach on this is that what we're talking about is acts that humans are doing today outside of a political spectrum. So we are talking about people that are, in out doing poaching or human trafficking and things like that, not necessarily in the political realm. So, that's a different podcast entirely. That's not even on our platform. We focus on, things that we can do every day that will change and influence how the world operates outside of the political spectrum. And so, with that in mind, when we're talking about, human trafficking, anti-poaching, or, all those topics, violence for good, it sounds like that gray area no one really likes to address, right? So we have a lot of people that speak, at least black and white, the moral high ground, as it were, or even their approach to the world. It's either you're doing this or you're against it, and it's not always that way. And I think this is a topic that really talks about that gray area. And you kind of mentioned it, people wanting to feed themselves. I follow this follower, Fearless and Far. Hey, if you're listening, cool. He's like, I'm vicariously living through this person because he travels all across the world into like some of these most remote areas, bringing his cameras, and it's just him. And right now he was in the Congo over in Africa, and he's walking through this road that's been flooded, and he's carrying an alligator that these his tour guides, basically, or his motor guides, had helped him kill because they ran out of food, and they were actually being hunted by like some warlord in the area, because he's the only white guy in the area, and so he's a pretty good target. So he's carrying this dead, not baby, but a small alligator on his shoulder for food to offer to a village so that he can have a night to stay in a dry space. And that alone kind of sets the scene, right? We're in a very remote area. People do not have electricity in this area, let alone a cell phone. They know what cameras are and stuff. They're, they're a part of the world, but it's not their day to day at all. And so when he arrives, they accept him. And then this kid comes up to him later that shows him an armadillo that he had killed for food. Now, in that area and basically across the world, armadillos have been poached, and they're basically an endangered species. So he's literally being shown, this kid that's super excited that he got food for his family by an endangered animal. And they cut down trees in the area they're not supposed to cut down, things like that. But when you look at them, you go, of course you're doing those things. Because in order for you to survive, you need to do those things. There's no other resource for you. And so we can demonize, and he mentions this, we can demonize people for doing that, but when it really comes to living, they're going to do what they're going to do. And actual actions towards these sometimes are influenced by survival. Now, are they morally correct? No, but people are going to do what they feel like they need to do. And in parts of suburbia, probably in suburbia, in Serbia, over in the desert in Russia, a total suburbia of Russia, right? One of the coldest, most desolate areas in the world is the Serbian desert, but it also hosts tigers. And there's so much poaching that happens with tigers, specifically when the economy goes down. People are having hard times, so they go and poach. Same thing happens, with rhinoceros and elephants and gaining the ivory from their tusks and horns. And so all of that increases when economies or war conflict occurs, because people are trying to survive. And a lot of these people don't enjoy what they're doing. And there's plenty of documentaries that show that too. Now, when it comes to doing violence for good, there are causes out there that are helping to combat this. They tend to do things that prevent people going for, in a sense, the easy out, right? So, for example, there are causes out there that this is trigger warning. There are causes out there that will actually go and find rhinoceroses, and they will tranquilize them, and then they're actually sawing off their horns. And then the rhinoceros wakes up and he has no horn left, but he goes on about his life. What this does is that it prevents poaching, specifically to rhinos, to take their horns and end up with a dead rhino with no horn. Now we have a rhino that's living with no horn. And so it's been incredibly
sorry, just to be clear about this so that people understand, is that typically poachers will kill the animal, take the horn, and then just leave the dead animal carcass there. It's not even used for food in many cases. So just wanted to give that information because of what you're saying. Literally, they're taking away the reason. By taking away the horns, they're taking away the reason that a poacher would even want to kill that animal.
Exactly.
Right.
And, what this does is that it prevents them from even looking for rhinos, or they see a rhino with no horn. It's no longer valuable to them. It's not a meat that is sellable or usable unless they're in very dire straits. And the same thing's happening with elephants. Poaching on elephants is ginormous. I mean, think about it. If you're in a small village or even a city and you're going to remote areas of your landscape, you're not going to source tranquilizers. That's not easily accessible compared to bullets, surprisingly enough, right? And so you're going to kill the animal that could potentially kill you so that you could source their ivory, right? And so things like this are happening across the entire world. And so finding these preventative measures is an act of violence. Sawing off a horn of a rhino is not pretty to watch, but it is necessary for the livelihood and the continuation of the species because they are endangered. And so this is where it's that gray area, right? It's like, we don't want to harm this animal, technically sawing off ivory is not harming the animal in terms of pain. And so that's that gray area. It looks like violence, it feels like violence, but it's preventing further and I guess you could say worse violence. Um, so it's an interesting gray area that we enter with this topic. And there's other things that I know we're going to talk about, which is going to be like some organizations that are more popular, like in the silver screen, we have Machine Gun Preacher. Do you want to tell our audience a little bit about Machine Gun Preacher?
Yeah, basically, we have a man named Sam Childers who comes from a very rough background, right? So he was a biker, he was a drug addict, alcoholic, who basically was inspired through religion to change his ways, and he decided to go to Sudan and basically try to directly using skills that he had learned as a biker, basically what you might say like an enforcer, using violent means to literally battle against the abuse of children that were left by well, basically as a result of war. You have like living children who are then put in could be recruited or other horrible things that could happen to these children. So his mission, and you might say lifelong mission, has been to create orphanages to save these children, to support them, create opportunities for them. But his methods have been extremely controversial, right? So, I mean, we can easily look at what he's trying to do and say that's an amazing thing, but his methods have been criticized because some say that his methods have gone against what the others are trying to do. They're too radical. But he's literally, you might say, almost like a war, literally fighting against some people that are doing some pretty evil things, right? So again, it's not a simple thing to talk about. It's not easy for us to say what's right without knowing more information and being there in those situations. But as a teacher of martial arts, something that I've been confronted with from the very beginning is the idea that if somebody attacks me or my family, that I have the right to defend myself, and therefore I'm going to use violence. So in that word violence has a negative connotation, right? But the reality is that inflicting harm in a emotionally charged way, which it almost always would be if you're doing that kind of act to another human being, is a violent act, right? But we're trying to do something to preserve. We're trying to do something to help others, and so there's innumerable situations that we can look at violence being done to try to help a certain group of people. And again, we're not getting into politics. We're not getting into the sides about who should own land or who should own resources. We're not getting into any of that, but simply talking about the fact that there are a lot of organizations that are out there that are literally, you might say, in the field, literally doing things that are very controversial, violent acts, you might say, in order to try to preserve or save things. And I think that, again, just having a broader perspective of this, don't be afraid of the word violence. Because it's just a word. Don't be afraid of what it might mean when you say that word. Just think about what's happening and what's we can't separate humanity from violence. I mean, basically, when you talk about people surviving every time they kill one thing so that they can eat, so that they can live, now whether that should be plants or animals or whatever is something that everybody's got to decide for themselves. But even the destruction of even plants, there's some that say that they have maybe they don't have a developed nervous system, but that there's on an energetic level that they feel pain. And so, but it's the only way that people can eat. So you can't really separate violence from nature, really. and that would mean the nature of people. So, I've let me turn it back over to you because I've gotten really off on the tangent there. But um, there are some other examples that we want to highlight. But I think the main thing again is that it doesn't take much for people to do a little bit of research and find out who's out there and what they're doing. And that's part of what we also try to do with our podcast is shed more light and highlight companies that are doing great things. But it doesn't take much searching to find things that are controversial. But mainly what we're trying to accomplish is the conversation. We're trying to get people thinking about it. We're trying to get people talking about it. We're trying to get people to not demonize other people because they disagree with what they're doing, but to try to understand, and then when it comes to, us actually taking one action or another and we end up having to take sides, well, that just happens,
Yeah.
but so those are my thoughts on it. How would you follow that up?
Yeah, again, it kind of goes back to that gray area, right? That we're addressing. It's like there comes a point where yes, you do need to say, I'm going to choose black, I'm going to choose white, I'm going to choose left, I'm going to choose right, because it's directly affecting people, animals, planet, right? But then there are those gray areas still that exist where it's just kind of like, I don't know how I feel about this, but I want this action that's happening out there to stop. So,
Mhm. Right.
but it's going against maybe my moral compass, maybe my religious beliefs, or just personal beliefs in general, or and any of those things. So, kind of circling back again to Machine Gun Preacher, for those of you who don't know Machine Gun Preacher, basically just watch the movie Machine Gun Preacher with Girard Butler. He represents Sam Childers in the film, and it kind of tracks his journey going from the biker gang to saving all these kids, and he's been doing it for probably about 20 years now, which is amazing. And he basically saves kids from becoming child soldiers by literally picking up a machine gun with his crew and going to villages where they hear information that warlords basically coming in, killing the families and destroying the area and taking the children to become child soldiers. So he goes in and he uses those machine guns in order to save that village and or children, and the children who have no parents, he will take them to his orphanage. Um, it's a pretty astounding story, and it's still a thing happening today, even though we quote unquote have peace between North and South Sudan now. It's still an issue. And again, that kind of comes to that gray area, right? We don't want people to pick up arms to get rid of the bad guy because that represents like a war kind of scenario, right? Um, or are you now becoming the warlord for justice, right? And so what does that define you? Are you now a warlord? Are you now the problem, right? And so all those questions are rising. And one thing I think that Sam Childers says that reflects on all of these acts of violence for good that we're kind of talking about is he says, if in kind of to your point of kung fu, if your child is being taken by someone with a weapon like that in that kind of environment and taken to become a child soldier, would you want me to go get your son or daughter? No questions asked. And 99.9% of the time, parents will say absolutely, right? And so it's one of those gray areas where it's like it's easy to say there's a problem until it's your problem. And so it's like it's one of these things where you do need to watch these kind of organizations, like any good cause. Do watch them and make sure they're staying within their ethical lanes. But with these causes that uses violence, sometimes they're going to wiggle in and out of that line that has been drawn because the mission of saving children prioritizes the acts of how they do it, right? And so
Right.
it's just so interesting to even see the chatter online, right? And of course, online it's always toxic, but it's interesting to see the chatter online when you go to like an Instagram post or a Facebook post about things like this. So it's going to be interesting when we start posting on our pages what people are going to say, and
Yeah.
and it's very one view oriented, it's either you agree or you don't agree, and it's very strong opinions. But again, I agree and I disagree with these methods. It's like I
Yeah.
disagree that we have to do these methods. I disagree with why we need to do these methods, but I am going to support these methods regardless. Right.
Yeah.
And it's such a conflict of spirits that can occur. And that also can influence people to support or to be against organizations like these that are using violence to for the sake of good. Right.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes. I
and
want to say, mhm.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I think that this topic merits an important discussion about doing nothing. I mean, this is,
Mm,
it's most people that you can observe in society basically sort of sit back and are expecting the government to do something about the problems of the world, or the governments, or they're expecting somebody else to do something. And and the reality is we have a person like Sam Childers or other people out there who are saying, hey, look, things that need to be done are not being done. And that could be you, the listener, right now. I mean, literally, you have to stop believing that somebody else is actually doing something. And sometimes it needs to be done by us. Now, I say that be careful about what you may be deciding to do right now, but it's we can't just passively believe that if we do nothing, that peace is going to rise to the top, because a lot of times it doesn't. A lot of times the people that take power in violent ways are doing that literally because the majority of people are sitting around doing nothing, or they're not stopping them from doing that. And so, this is when you get into the whole topic of the necessity of military, or which is again controversial, right? But it's just simply the idea that what we're really trying to inspire people to do with this website is to do more, to learn more, to be involved, to decide, hey, there's some things I disagree with, some things I agree with, but I need to be more involved with these things, and maybe spend less time, less of our lives just simply sitting back and entertaining ourselves, by turning on the television and just trying to be entertained with the latest sitcom or drama, while the world literally goes on by people who are, taking action. So there could be people out there taking action for good, or people taking action for bad, or all the gray areas that we're talking about. But if you're not involved, it doesn't mean it's not happening.
and I think that's a great transition to kind of talk a little bit about the difference between being involved with organizations like these, or to do voluntary efforts, or to get involved more with, say, a good cause as a career, or spokesperson, or whatever that looks like for you, for anyone, and different
Hmm.
levels of engagement. That, compared to, and we're going to bring it up because it's a concern, is that compared to what we call green terrorism. And green terrorism is basically kind of the violent action of destroying something that goes against, or what you feel is harming, say, the earth, animals, and the planet specifically. It's usually environmental related. And so that example could be, I'm going to go and bomb a nuclear facility or an oil plant, or sabotage, things like that, where they're literally using explosives, or they're killing people even, to counter, in a sense, this kind of corporate capitalism idea that's destroying the environment. That's usually the kind of umbrella description of what it is. And
Hmm.
there's a difference between using violence like that to cutting a rhino, cutting the horn off of a rhino to prevent poaching. There's a big difference. And
Hmm.
so we are not condoning green terrorism. What
Hmm.
we're doing here is we're talking about efforts that everybody can do to make change based off of everyone else's other human activity and their influences and their directives, really.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about human trafficking specifically. We kind of touched on it with Sam Childers, with the, child soldiers. But of course, human trafficking across the world is a huge issue. And interesting enough, and sadly enough, here in Colorado in the United States, we're here in the Rocky Mountains. If you don't know where Colorado is, go ahead and Google it. We are, in a sense, the gateway between East versus West because we have this highway called I-70. And I-70 just goes straight through the mountains. It's a very direct path to get from east to west without having to get close to the border, any border, Canada or Mexico. What that has facilitated is human trafficking. That is also their corridor. So it's interesting enough. I actually live in a county and I live next to a county here in the Rocky Mountains that has the highest amount of human trafficking, at least movement or transportation, in the entire United States. And if you look at the state of Colorado, it does not represent any of that, really. We're very much in the middle between political ideologies. We have rural, we have urban, we have mountains, we have plains. Like we have a lot of diversity in all sorts of aspects of what you would look at in terms of an area. And yet, we have the highest human trafficking rate in the entire United States. And if I'm correct, I think it actually might be North America, but double check me on that. No, don't quote me. Um, so it became, once that was enlightened, it became a huge effort for the entire area to really be at watch for that. We have signs everywhere of what to look for. And we even have call to actions for people who are being human trafficked. If you go into a bathroom anywhere within those counties, you'll see in that bathroom stall a sign that says, "Are you being human trafficked?" in different languages. And here's what you can do. So again, it's kind of that education of the damaging things that are happening. And it can be in your backyard, it can be worldwide, and it can be somewhere very far away from you. But the thing is that if we don't take action when we've been educated, it can be something small. Like if you see something in a gas station that looks like human trafficking, in my instance, that could be a case. I'm going to make that phone call. I'm going to take action. I'm going to approach that person and ask if they're okay. So it's just educating yourself and seeing what small actions you can do or large actions you can do. Donation, volunteering, taking a career in that area, talking about it with people, sharing a podcast episode, a little plug. So it's things like that that really make large changes. And in terms of human trafficking, I find it very close to home, literally, of how we have been a part of it unknowingly. But now that we know, we can make behavioral changes, right, to help humanity if that goes against your values. So I know a lot of people in this area, in this area you can own guns. They do because it's very rural, very ranching country. And so many people have talked about, they're like, if I come into that situation where I see, especially, in the scenario, a man having a woman in terms of sex trafficking, I'm going to address that issue. And if it creates problems, I have no problem using my weapon. And honestly, in that scenario, I'm okay with it. I'm going to say it. I'm totally okay with that because her life to me is more important than the trafficker. And so it's that gray area, that concern that we have of how we want the world to become and what are you willing to compromise in a sense to have that happen. And that's what, again, that gray area. What do you do when it comes to be your problem now, right? So there's my
and yeah,
soapbox.
it's a good you mentioned like again, when you decide for yourself what you believe you're okay with and so forth, again, it's important to remind all of our listeners that if they disagree with anything that we're saying, it's good that you're here listening to disagree. This is simply where it starts. Is it starts with discussion, and it starts with thinking about things and being more involved. And really, more than anything, what Good Viral is about, as you all probably know by now, is we're just simply trying to get people to do more with their lives than just simply sitting back and like I talked about before, waiting for other people to do things, because we can. We believe that people can and want to do more, and that's exactly what we're trying to encourage all of you to do. So so maybe pick sides. Maybe pick the wrong side in the beginning and then change sides. Do what you have to do to learn and to find out what things are out there, what's happening. What kind of causes are in your backyard? What kind of causes are on for you, a national level, or depending on where you are in the world, international level? What's happening, and what are people doing, and what can you do? And maybe, who knows, maybe you might spearhead or start some kind of amazing organization or group, using the social media or using the connections that you have to try to do good things, because quite honestly, most of the people that are out there doing, you might say, bad things are just simply people who are, you might say, misguided. They just simply haven't really learned, haven't got the right perspective, haven't been around the right people, and it just leads them to make choices where for them it makes perfect sense. Those are not the people that are listening to this podcast, right? So those of you who are listening are people who already basically support our premise, but we're gonna say some things that that you may not agree with, and I'm just happy that you're here so that you can disagree with what we're saying or agree with what we're saying. So start the conversation with others, have the conversation with people, talk, and sometimes you need to disconnect, but sometimes you really need to have the conversations about things that need to be talked about.